Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome to another Pride and Grit Spouse Spotlight. I am excited today to bring you a retired military spouse, Reda Hicks, and let her talk a little bit about her path and what she's up to because I found this really kind of interesting. Just as I've told you guys before, I love it when there's something a little bit different and something that I haven't heard before. So, Reda, I'm excited to talk to you and excited to hear about what you're up to. So, welcome to Pride and Grit and welcome to our spotlights.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, if you could kind of introduce yourself for both really myself and our audience, just kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about kind of your mill spouse path, and then, a little bit about beyond that as well.
Sure. So my husband served in the Army for 22 years. He was an Army Special Forces soldier, and he retired in 2015. I spent the last 9 years of his service with him, and we've been married for a total of 13 years. We have a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old. So my military spouse path was 100% geo-batch.
Oh,
In
wow.
those, right. So in those 9 years that we were together, he was at 5 different duty stations, and I spent all of that time based in Houston, Texas. And the reason for that is because when we met, I was already a practicing attorney in Texas at a law firm, partnership track. And I think we all are very well acquainted now with the licensing barriers for military
Right.
spouses. In 2008, 2009, there were no states
Yeah,
that
right.
allowed accommodations for military spouses. Now, the conversation has been changed dramatically, but at the time, we chose for me to be separate because of those challenges. And so, that was a very interesting
Yeah,
time. I'm happy to dive into
yeah,
more,
it's
but he
very, I
retired
mean,
and
yeah. I can imagine. I mean, on the upside, right, there's not that transition and you actually get to sort of establish roots, but I imagine there's definitely sort of pluses and minuses to, to not being able to kind of be a full part of that sort of extended military spouse community that we traditionally think of as we move sort of place to place. So that is super interesting.
that's
Um,
right. That probably my single biggest challenge. It was a blessing for us to be able to geomatch because it
sure.
gave me career stability that has benefited us as a family after serving. But
Right.
yeah, that was being a remote spouse was no joke
Right. Yeah. I mean,
for a host of reasons.
it is definitely hard to, you weather deployments and especially special forces, lots of those in sort of rapid succession, I'm sure, and not necessarily having the people around you that kind of understand that in the way that, you're having to navigate that. So no, that is very interesting. So yeah, like what do you think now as that's becoming, and not that it's easy by any stretch now for spouses to kind of cross state lines and carry those licensures, place to place. Would that have changed your calculus now, like having been through that, or would you kind of do it the
Right.
same?
I think the ability to take my practice where my husband went would have significantly changed
Yeah.
our trajectory. Um, because it is simply a reality that a lot of spouses come out of law school with significant education debt.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of and there are a host of reasons for this, but for a lot of families, two incomes are a necessity.
Sure.
And so at that time, it wasn't even a choice for me not to be fully employed.
Hmm.
And there are so many spouses I know who have figured out how to make that work, but it's really hard. Not having to make that choice between a continuous career and a family would have been tremendous. And I would have not hesitated to go seek relicensure in a new state for our family to be able to stay together.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about what might have been.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like someone always had to come before, right? And so there's, I love the stories of the people who really started this conversation and started to really fight for the need for this and to show the impact it would have on families and the impact it would have on even retention, I think, to a large degree. So it is very interesting to kind of see the evolution and see how things are changing. And when you didn't get to benefit, it's like, oh man, just a few years away, it might have been a different scenario for you. But it sounds like it sounds like it's worked out for you guys.
Yeah, and my perspective is, and I think this is, true for a lot of spouses on a lot of things that have changed in recent years, is we're happy to have smoothed out the path for the people that follow. It doesn't need to be as hard to serve along someone who's serving as it has historically been. So those barriers that we can bust down, that's a point of pride. It's not a, oh, I wish it is a little bit, oh, I wish I'd had that, but also no one else is going to have to make the choices that I made. So that's a tremendous relief also.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I mean, and it's okay. Like it's this much, right? But it might be there. But really, I think more than anything, it is, at least for me and maybe for you as well. It's really nice to be able to see the things that are a little bit easier than we might have had it or are still having it. So in terms of that, Millet, so then I think the question I normally ask, I think will be a little bit different for you, but I'm still kind of curious, as you look at those years that you spent, as a military spouse, what are the things about sort of that role that were kind of the thing that you remember and as fondly, and then the thing that maybe you found the most challenging? I would imagine the separation ranks pretty high, but was there something else that you found kind of particularly challenging during those years?
Because I was remote, I started out from a place of having to seek out the community, and fortunately, I found it pretty quickly in Facebook, thank goodness, but military spouse groups,
Right.
things like Military Spouse JD Network, which I spent a number of years working with that group in various capacities, and then getting to work with In Gear Career and other groups like that. I think I was more devoted to seeking out that kind of
Interesting.
relationship than I
Yeah.
might have been if I had friends on my block who were
Sure.
living my life. And
Right.
so I might have a greater appreciation for those resources even than some of my spouse colleagues who have, local people who are living life like theirs. Super grateful for those still, because we move around so much that being able to have, relationships based through social media, and particularly during a time like this, has been really great. But being remote was also the biggest challenge,
Sure.
not only for my family figuring out, how to be a spouse, because I come from a military heavy family, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
different when you're married
Yeah,
to a
yeah.
soldier.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And so, like, learning the ropes, understanding what I'm supposed to be doing, figuring out how to help when I'm not even there,
Yeah.
was really hard. And then we did, during when my son was 3, we weathered a 10-month deployment to Afghanistan, and that was hard to do remotely too, because nobody around me
Right.
was walking that same walk.
No.
And we had other friends around the country who were weathering deployments, but it was just different,
Yeah.
because it's not like you can schedule play dates and let the kids who are all missing their parents,
Right.
spend some time together and cheer each other up, and maybe have a couple glasses of wine with the spouses to cheer each other up. That it was a different dynamic.
Yeah.
And also different because, we live in Houston, which has a huge veteran population, actually
Sure.
over 350,000 vet families,
Whoa.
but the schools are not equipped
Right. I was just thinking about school.
to provide resources for kids of active duty parents who are deployed. And our school, the schools here, tried really hard to be a resource for him, but they were also kind of figuring out as they went.
Right.
So I think those were the biggest challenges. Were just figuring out how to stay connected and stay grounded and understand what's going on, and all of those things from afar. That's hard.
Yeah, no, I can certainly imagine that would have been a challenging piece. I love what you said though about kind of seeking things out, because I think there is some truth to the fact that, as we are immersed in a community, maybe it's easy to take it for granted a little bit that it's always just kind of going to be there, right? You're just going to have this
Mhm.
network that is available to the extent that you engage with it, um, because that's just sort of how it is, right? You go to the next base, and that is what is already there, and you kind of just sort of take that for granted. So I love that you really stepped outside and really sought that out, and probably like appreciated those connections differently, because you had taken that extra effort to find them yourself. So I love that.
That's true. And so here's what I'll say on the flip side. The bright side is that being able to grow up all in one professional community has been its own blessings too. And talking about, not taking things for granted. I now volunteer for Bunker Labs in Houston, and with veterans and military spouses who have chosen to, wind up here, but they've served all over. And I have a really tremendous network I'm able to leverage for them. And it's not comparable to the networks that they bring, because I have not only, had 15 years to build business relationships
Right.
here, but also to build up a lot of trust in the community institutions that provide a lot of resources here. So that's something I'm super grateful for.
Yeah.
That is unique among my peers too, is to be able to pick up the phone and find whatever,
Hmm.
another military spouse or veteran needs here, just because I've been here for so long.
Right. Yeah, no, that's it is a really, it's part of those roots that I think all of us that are kind of moving place to place really kind of envy to some extent, that ability to really establish those roots and be able to make those connections and to really have that network to come back to when you need it. So that, you know,
For sure.
that's awesome that you're using it then, for the greater military community, which is cool. I love that. I didn't realize you worked with Bunker. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
Well, so it's connection. That's kind of in my DNA. It's my spirit word, if you will. so, so I actually really enjoyed being able to do that.
yeah, no, I bet. So tell us a little bit about I guess the work that you do and kind of how your practice then evolved into your venture now and what that looks like.
Sure. So I have been practicing law in Houston for almost 15 years. And I spent the first 10 of them working in complex commercial work, bankruptcy and restructuring. The short version is I worked with a lot of different kinds of broken businesses,
Hmm.
um, walking them through kind of the worst days of the sort of life of their business.
Right.
And sort of one theme that you see over and over again in that work is the key role that overhead plays in a business's success or failure. I mean, there are so many amazing local businesses that fail just because rent
Hmm.
is an uncontrollable force against their bottom line. And even a really good landlord that wants to keep a really good tenant only has a certain degree of flexibility to be able to work with that problem. So I spent, my first 10 years doing that in a law firm. And then when my husband retired, the logic was that he was finally going to be living here. And so I needed to roll into a legal practice that was a little bit more stable with a little bit lighter schedule. So I went in house at a global logistics company. And there I did, basically everything inside, from regulatory to government affairs, managing contracts, all that kind of thing. But it put me in a company that had hundreds of thousands of square foot of warehousing. So in 2017, when Hurricane Harvey hit,
Mm.
I started getting tons of phone calls from my local community, and they could not find the space to be able to activate for emergency activities.
Hmm.
And that was, it struck me that that would be a problem. But the simple fact is that the sort of public and nonprofit engines in a community work quite well together.
Hmm.
But the private engine in a community is really only looked at as a resource in terms of the dollars that can be donated, which are important, and volunteers, which are also important,
Hmm.
but not as a tool to be harnessed in terms of providing a built environment for activities when a community needs them. So I started thinking about this problem. It has to be solvable. And then I started realizing, well, there's this rich resource in the community that can solve that problem. I'm thinking about this question of how can the private sector be a better sort of partner for things that happen in a community in terms of the built environment. But the other thing I'm realizing is that the built environment in a community should also be a resource for this virtual and freelance economy in the community. And I was thinking specifically about the many, many men and women I know who are military spouses who have a fully portable hustle
Hmm.
because they have to,
Right.
because it never makes sense for a military spouse to enter into a commercial lease Because if the DoD calls you tomorrow and says, hey, you're PCSing, there aren't the same protections to break that lease that there are if you need to get out of an apartment lease, for instance.
Sure.
And when I would talk to a lot of these spouses in the Facebook groups or what have you, they're really good at all the things that they do, whether it's, culinary arts or fitness or some kind of freelancing work or even, a virtual law practice. And they get opportunities that are just too big for home to cut it.
Yeah.
But a lease is also not a great idea. So they're in this like no man's land of I need space, but I only want to pay for it for when I actually need it.
Right.
And the way they would find that space is Google,
Yeah.
which is a terrible resource for finding exactly what you need in a timely manner, because you can get caught in the rabbit hole and you can make 30 phone calls before you get to a yes. And those minutes might mean somebody else gets your opportunity. And so, as I'm thinking through that problem, I'm thinking, yeah, this needs to be solved, but I'm a lawyer, which is a famously non-technical career field. And so I really didn't think I was the right person to solve it. So, I'm thinking through these things and trying to figure out how I can help. And anytime I had a resource for a space, I would connect people sort of organically, but I didn't really think that would wind up being a business.
Right.
But then fast forward to 2017 when Harvey hits, and I see my community scrambling in the same way for space. I'm kicking myself. Like, why didn't I build something? Why didn't I try and solve this problem? Because if I had, not only would I be helping other spouses every day find the space that they need to be awesome, but I would be helping my community find warehousing for relief efforts and a yard so that Team Rubicon can set up faster.
Right.
And that's a real world example. When Team Rubicon came here for the tax day flood, they lost 3 days just trying to find a lay down yard.
Oh, wow.
And when you're dealing with flooding, that's critical time.
Yeah.
You lose lives, but you also lose a ton of property because mold happens fast in a wet environment along the Gulf Coast. And so that was really the kick in the pants I needed to get going. So I started my company Gotspot out of a desire to create those connections in my community that help all kinds of businesses grow every day. And then also as an emergency resource for our communities on their worst day.
Right. And so is it, I guess the structure of it, is it temporary? Is it day to day? Is it, month to month, or what is the structure if there's a space that works for someone? How do they use that?
It works just like Airbnb does.
Okay.
And it's hour and day increments. So we're talking about really short time frame. I need to borrow a fitness studio for 3 days to teach a yoga workshop, or I need a commercial kitchen for a day to fill a really big cake order for this restaurant that wants to sell my desserts at lunch, or something like that. Once it gets into the month to month space, a more formalized lease agreement is more appropriate. And I actually have a channel partner with a veteran-owned company called Tenavox, and I usually send people to them when they're ready to take that step and have longer-term space. But the way it works is that if you needed a space in order to host a podcast, for instance,
right,
you would get on Gotspot, you would find it, you would book it, you would show up and use it, and then you'd be going on about your business. Or if you had space that you wanted to let other people use when you're not using it, you can create a listing, decide when you wanted to make it available, what you want to charge, and then you pop up your listing and, people come and go, and there's ratings built in so that we can monitor and make sure everybody's having a good business experience. But the idea is to build relationships so that if you have an amazing experience in a space that you reserved, you'll go back to it again because it works well for you.
Right. And so then the spaces are not particularly customized. They're just sort of as is, show up, do what you need to, and then.
Yeah. So it depends on what you want to do with it, right? Because customized, maybe not. Specialized, yes, because you want to borrow commercial kitchen space that has certain kinds of blenders or certain kinds of ovens, right? That information is available and you can see it. And if what you're looking for is an event space, for instance, we have partnerships with, photographers, caterers, people who provide rentables. So we're not selling those things,
Mm-hmm.
but we provide you access to those things to be able to bring into the space to use it, and then have those things taken away again once you're done.
Right.
So
Makes sense.
we're really focused on this sort of space component of it. And it could be super simple, show up, borrow a conference room and go, or it could be more complex. And we leverage local business relationships to make the more complex parts happen.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I would imagine too for those businesses, that had these spaces and didn't have a use for them. It's got to be just a really great partnership for them as well to be able to
Mm-hmm.
offer that up and to benefit financially from it, but also just sort of benefit from a relationship standpoint within the community. It just seems like
Yeah.
such a win-win for them.
It's both, right? Because the whole goal is to create a new source of revenue for these businesses
Mm-hmm.
so that they can stay open, not dependent just on their own customer traffic. But yeah, the other piece of it is we have this long-standing narrative that Main Street and the virtual economy are frenemies, and Amazon is going to kill Main Street and all these different things. But the simple fact is, the bulk of the 57 plus million freelancers around the country are your neighbors.
Right.
And so if you're a local boutique and you make it a point to let other small local brands pop up in your store, what you're doing is bringing interest into your
Mm-hmm.
space, supporting another local business that also happens to have an online presence, and you're both growing at the same time. And for me, that community connection piece is really the critical component,
Yeah.
because when you have really healthy local businesses, all sorts of good things happen for the community. And that's the ultimate goal, is
Right.
resilience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Especially, I'm sure now in particular. So,
Yeah.
and I noticed looking at your website, the sort of the Houston banner that you have right now. So I assume everything started for you in Houston, and is that where you are staying, or have you sort of fanned out? Is there an intent to fan out?
We started here because Houston is home, and I wanted to try and prove it out in my hometown. A lot of love for this community that has taken a lot of care of us over the years, but it's intended to be a resource that can go anywhere. So, what I have been working on in the past year is actually developing a brand ambassador program so that someone could help pop up a nucleus of spots
Oh.
and build Gotspot in other places.
Hmm.
And, it's come full circle a little bit, because my strategy actually is to focus on cities where there are military installations nearby,
Mm.
because I know that this is a hole in the ecosystem of resources that military spouses need, but they also are, primely positioned to be brand ambassadors, make
Yeah.
a little money off of helping to grow my business while creating a tool for their own businesses. So I'm thinking about the military cities in Texas, of course, but I'm also thinking of places like Little Rock, places like Pensacola and Tampa. And I'm particularly focused on the Southeast, because even the pretty good sized population centers in this part of the country are really not getting a lot of attention from the East and West Coast players that are trying to build business environments for business.
Mm.
So I'm trying to focus on being a resource in these places where there are thriving business communities, and also really large veteran and spouse communities, but they're just not getting the same attention to help grow their local business communities as other parts of the country.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. That make I mean that's it makes sense. That's great. So if folks are in those areas, and I don't know, but if there was an interest in either finding space or helping with the growth plan that you were mentioning, what is the best way for folks to kind of get in touch with you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so anyone who's interested in learning about our growth plan or talking to me about brand ambassadorship can reach out to me directly, info@gotspotinc.com, and we can send along materials. We can set up a time for a conversation. For me, learning from spouses about the communities that they're in is a really important thing, because I think each different business community is different, and understanding how the community works, what particular industries might be important there, what the local business culture is like. Is it more formal or is it less formal? Is it what are the ins and outs? That's really important. The last thing I want to do is be a person who sits in Houston, Texas, and go to Little Rock, Arkansas, and pretend I know how to build a business there, right? So the goal of engaging local partners to help with that is they understand their town and they can talk to me about what they think they need in order to help it grow, and then I can provide the tools that will make them successful.
Yeah, no, I mean you can't know everything. That's absolutely
So
absolutely true. Um, awesome. That's it's so interesting, and I love it because from a just a personal standpoint, I think there are definitely been situations where, like, even for me, I've wished I had a space, and I think of it more as sort of a workspace, but just a space that is
mm,
outside of my home. There's often value for me in getting outside of this space to do some of the things that I'm doing just for sort of change of scenery sometimes, and the ability to connect with people somewhere other than my home. They're,
yeah,
meeting at Panera gets old at some point, like,
it does, and that's good. That's good sometimes. And listen, I co-work in coffee shops in Houston plenty,
hmm
but sometimes you need quiet.
hmm
And sometimes you need privacy if you want to have a meeting about your business and don't necessarily want everyone around you
right,
hearing what you're saying. And, what I know from having worked in a law firm for nearly a decade is that all of them have conference rooms that sit empty a very large chunk of the time.
right,
And the office space is a large piece of their overhead.
hmm
So they can offset it just a little bit by giving you that quiet place that you need to work a couple days a month or whatever that looks like. That's good for everybody.
yeah.
And that's the idea, is like, let's take what is already there and awesome in a community and better leverage it, so that the people holding it benefit, but the people who need it also can find it.
Yep. No, that's cool. I look forward to kind of watching this, and watching it for you. So I'm glad you hung out with us and told us a little bit about it today.
Sure. Yeah, no, um, the thing that the military spouse community taught me the most and continues to teach me is this idea of sort of resilience.
hmm
And what that looks like is figuring out how to bloom where you're planted is the little trope, but it really is about like, um, getting gritty and figuring out like, how am I going to make this work where I am? Who do I need to call? What resources do I need? What's the easiest path to those resources? And I am awed every day by how well military spouses do in all sorts of conditions. And what I'm trying to do is just make it a little bit easier by facilitating connections that should be happening,
Right.
to make life easier for spouses, certainly, but for all kinds of businesses, so that it's something that works with you when you're having to move all the time and when you ultimately land wherever it is that you're going to land. But the other thing that has been really important to me is just the community, right? The collaborative, creative nature of this wildly different, diverse, all over the place community, that wants you to succeed,
hmm
wants to help you reach what's possible. And I guess this is really kind of my way of facilitating that for other people,
Yep.
kind of trying to give back.
Yeah. No. Yeah. There we are. An interesting bunch. There's so much talent, and to your point, there's just such variety in what people are doing and how they're doing it, and there is, I think, just so much reaching back that I continue to see happen. And I love that, and in a lot of different ways, especially someone like yourself who's several years removed, but I think it's like, as people say, like, once a military spouse, always a military spouse, and I think there's some truth to that it doesn't sort of leave who you are, and wanting to give back to that community, I think, is a pretty common place people find themselves even after service has ended.
Yes, I had a senior spouse once say to me, spouses don't wear a rank, which means they never retire. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because I know
Right.
so many spouses that have stayed connected and engaged and continue to try to blaze that trail for the other men and women that are following them. And, they inspire me to want to do the same.
Yep. No, likewise. Well, thank you, Rita, for hanging out with us today. I'm glad you did.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. Hope you enjoyed that as I did, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.